Hello and welcome to today's webinar titled Answers to Your Top 5 Questions and Concerns About Investing for Retirement or to Create Wealth, hosted by Brian Struckman, CPA. If you're already a client, then you know Brian, but if you're listening on the replay and you're not a client, maybe this was forwarded to you by a friend or a coworker. Brian owns and runs Burks Tax and Business Services, which is a full-service accounting firm licensed in Pennsylvania and operating in Reading and Lancaster as Advantage Tax and Business Services. They provide business owners, executives, and individuals with a broad range of accounting and tax services, including tax preparation and planning, payroll, tax planning, business consultation, and personal financial planning. A quick disclaimer before we get started. Everyone's personal situation is unique, and therefore the investment advice and answers on this webinar are informational only and should not be implemented or acted on without first consulting your investment advisor and or a tax advisor. And during the webinar, there are two ways to ask questions. If you're listening online, you can use the Q&A or question and answer box to type in your question and information. It's right there on the page. Or if you're not listening on the internet, but you're listening just via a phone line, you can hit star 2 on your keypad to raise your hand, and we'll open your phone line in between slides and try and answer your question. If you do have a detailed, complex, or somewhat personal question that comes up on the webinar that you do not want to type in and discuss live, go ahead, type it in the chat and put personal or call me, and afterwards we can just forward those to Brian and he can talk to you about it offline. So without any other delay, Brian, welcome to the call.
Thank you, Jeff. For those who I haven't met or who don't know me, like Jeff said, my name is Brian Struckman. And we decided to do this call and send out the questionnaire and survey to everybody because I found that during tax season meeting with clients, I would typically get various questions. And I thought, well, there's going to be a lot of questions out there. So let's, take some time, and when we're not as busy and go through and put on this little webinar and help, educate everybody. So what you're seeing on this slide, this was the top question, and it is, how much money do I need to have to retire and then live comfortably? And boy, that's sort of a loaded question. It really comes down to is, how do you define live comfortably? Which, there's a couple steps we have listed on the right-hand side, and the very starting point of this whole journey is really knowing what you're spending today. And I tell clients all the time, if you're not using Quicken or Microsoft Money or some type of, app to track your expenses, I highly encourage it. It doesn't cost a whole lot. And you'd be quite surprised when you look at what you spend in a year, even a month or a week sometimes. And I'll go through and I'll look at this. And I'll be like, boy, how'd we spend that much money on groceries or whatever? It's just sort of amazing, but it gives you a good foundation to know what's it costing me to live every year. From there, you got to say, okay, well, how's that going to change when I retire? So, in other words, am I still going to have a mortgage? If I have 2 cars, am I going to have one? Am I going to have car payments? Am I going to have this debt? Do I want to travel? Those are all types of questions you need to really start thinking about to determine, well, what do you need to be able to retire and live on comfortably? And then, another question is, you're going to have this principal amount or how much you're going to invest. So let's say you have $500,000 you're going to invest. Well, the question is, do you want to preserve that and be able to leave that to your beneficiaries as inheritance? Do you think you can live off the appreciation, the interest, and dividends? And really, to determine that, we have an example here, and it varies for every person. So in this example, if you can have a portfolio where you're going to earn 10%, that's going to throw off $100,000 a year. So if you do your analysis and think you come up to a number and says, I only need 90,000 or 100,000, you're good. However, if you go the other route and you think you need 120,000, obviously you're going to have to cut into that principal. The same token goes, if you only need 50,000 to live, then you only need a portfolio that's going to earn about 5%. Now, if it's okay to touch the principal or you have to, the whole situation gets a little bit more complicated because first thing you got to figure out is, well, how long am I going to live? Well, nobody knows that answer. But, I can tell you that throughout time, we're living longer and longer. It really comes down to looking at your family history. How long have your parents lived? Have there been any major diseases or illnesses in your family? And trying to get an idea how long you're going to live. And then we take your living expenses, your return, your investments, and we can calculate a shortfall and actually project out how long your money will last you. And it's a sort of a complex situation. It's one of those things that, if you really want to go through that, call me, we'll schedule an appointment, we'll sit down, we'll go through everything, and I have some calculators we can use to try to figure that out. Any questions on this first question, this first slide? Okay, I'm going to move on. The second question, how do I invest to maximize returns and minimize risk while protecting your principal or your initial investment? Boy, I sort of wish I had a crystal ball, because it's, everybody wants to know that. How do you maximize your returns and not have any risk? And basically, those two things are opposites. To get a high return, you're going to have higher risk. If you want low risk, you're going to have a lower return. So the two aren't hand in hand. So what you need to do is be able to diversify so that you minimize your risk and achieve your investment goal. And when I say diversify, what that means is don't just go invest in one stock or just stocks altogether. You want a portfolio that is going to have a blend and a mix of stocks, bonds, money markets, mutual funds, et cetera, et cetera. And the weighting of that will be in accordance to where your risk is, because each of these different types of investments have different risk associated with them. The other thing is, the larger your portfolio, the easier it is to diversify. If you only have $10,000 to invest, it's sort of harder to diversify because you don't have as much to work with. The other thing that is nice is the younger you are, and the longer the time frame is you have until you'll have to actually draw on this investment or need it, the more aggressive you can be over time. If it's a short-term range, you don't want to be too risky because you don't want to take a chance that you may lose some of it. And at the bottom of the screen, we give a little bit of an example, and up top it talked about asset classes. And really, if you had, say, money that you can invest in this example, we use $500,000. That maybe you invested in a rental property or real estate or something, hunting cabin, whatever, beach property, and then you take the rest and you invest it. Well, you can be a little bit more aggressive in the amount you invest, because typically real estate is going to appreciate or at least stay at the same level over time, and you have that. Sort of like in the old days, grandparents used to put it under their mattress. That that's there, and you can take the other money and you can invest that. So, hopefully I answered that. I know it's a little confusing at times, but those are some of my suggestions there. Moving on to the third concern, should I invest with a passive or robo strategy, or should I continue to actively invest on your own? And there again, it's one of those things that depends on a couple of factors. One, your strategy. Two, how comfortable you are doing it. If you are simply trying to invest in versus monitoring the indexes and trying to monitor the indexes, well, if you looked at last year, 2008, you'll see all the indexes declined. So it's not necessarily the best idea. Another question is, do you have the time to do the research, do all the trading and pick stocks? And, are you comfortable doing that? If so, and you like that, then active investing probably is a good option for you. But if you don't have the time, you don't have the knowledge, you're uncomfortable with it, I would recommend using an investment advisor who will do that for you. I mean, that's their job to do it for, several people. I shouldn't say several people, hundreds and thousands of people. Let them do what they're good at. with talking about that, I'm going to move to our next slide. We talked about risk in the second question, and I wanted to throw out there before I forget about this. I offer this to all my clients, whether you invest, with us or not. You just have a tax question or an investment question. People say to me, hey, I got this 401k from work, or I got this amount, from a job I had before that I have invested, and it doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot, or I'm not sure it's invested properly. How can you help? Well, we offer what we call a free risk tolerance analysis. And really, what this is all about is we'll sit down, we'll set a meeting, we'll sit down, and there's no cost for this. This is free. Free means free. I'm not going to try to sell you either to come invest with me. I'm just trying to help my clients. And as I tell my clients, investment advisory services is not my main source of business. I mean, they're investment advisors. That's all they do, and they rely on that for their main source of income. Obviously, the tax work and all the other accounting type work that we do, that's our main source of business. So, we're not actively trying to sell you on this. We're just trying to make sure that all our clients, purely understand, what it's going to take to retire and their investments. Because I've seen investment advisors out there who sometimes give tax advice, and comes the end of the year and you talk to me and that advice wasn't very good. So, but what we do, I get off track there. We actually will sit down and I'll ask you a series of questions to determine what we call your risk tolerance. In other words, how aggressively you would invest or how conservative you are. And these questions will seem very repetitive, but they all have their own goal to them. We will be able to take that, put it in our computer, and we'll determine how conservative or risky you are on a scale of 1 to 100. 100 being as risky as possible, 1, you're as conservative as can be. Somewhere in between there, you're going to fall. And then what we do is we take your current investments, we load those into the program, and they'll score it the same way. And then we'll compare the two and say, okay, well, it may turn out that maybe your score was a 40 and where you're currently invested, you're at a 70 or an 80, which means you're invested a lot more risky than you think you are. So we'll come back with our observations on it. We'll make suggestions, maybe talk about how you could reduce some risk. Again, it's not a sales pitch. It's just purely trying to give you some education. Okay, let's move on to our fourth concern. Okay, so concern is not having enough time or money to invest given the level of risk you're willing to take. Well, one of the things I preach is, not enough money. I tell my clients, hey, if your employer offers some type of retirement, whether it's a 401k, a simple plan, a STEP, use it. 1, you're getting the money put away tax-free up front. 2, most of these plans offer some type of match. So, for example, if your employer matches 3%, if you put in 1%, they're going to give you 1. You put in 3, they're going to give you 3. You put in 5, they're going to give you 3. I tell people, if you can, try as hard as possible, put to what they're going to match. So if they put 3, put 3, because you just doubled your money and it was free. What a way to sort of gain some money there. The other thing you look at is, well, the other side of this is, how do I reduce what I'm spending? What can you, if you have that program like Quicken or Microsoft, like I had mentioned earlier, you'll be able to go through your spending and see what you're really spending on and say, how can I cut back? You could do a budget, and, budget doesn't have to be all drawn out and detailed like some businesses do. I tell some people that, hey, you should have goals, and a budget's basically a goal. So set your financial goals. Maybe it's as simple as saying, hey, I want to reduce my cost to eat out and dining out $100 for the year. That's probably not a good example, but 5% or 10%. Write that down at the beginning of the year and put that away. And once every 90 days or so, pull that back out and look at it and compare to what you're doing. It can be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be very complex. I remember my grandparents used to have these envelopes and they put in there, that's how they budgeted. They'd say, okay, this envelope is to go out to dinner. This one, is for a car payment or mortgage payment, for groceries, and they had all these envelopes, and that's how they did it in the old days. It's pretty simplistic, actually a pretty good method. But nowadays with electronics, it's a little bit harder. You can take the they ran, approach, and I, like this too. Don't try to tackle it all at once. Take baby steps. Take the easy approach. Get your low-hanging fruit, so to speak, the easy things before you really start getting into the harder things. But, it's just taking those first steps and trying to do it, slowly over time. Another option is, you need more money, you can get a part-time job, nights and weekends. Not necessarily the best thing, especially if you have a family, because you like to spend quality time with your family and you're already probably working a full-time job. But, it is something you could do. A lot of people I know have started doing the Uber and Lyft thing. They like driving. They make some extra money. One thing that I've always told my mom, for those of you who may know her, she loved to shop. I always said to her, and I say to her now that she's retired, I said, Mom, you should be a secret shopper. Because she just loves to shop. I mean, there's different things you could do, sell things on Amazon, whatnot, to try to raise some extra money. If you don't have enough time, using the 401k and doing the matches, obviously your money sits in there and it's invested in whatever your chances are, or your choices are. The other thing you can do is use an investment advisor to help you invest your portfolio. And lastly, I recommend this whether you have enough time or not. Reevaluate your risk tolerance, financial goals. They will change over time. And you need to be looking at that and seeing what you need to do going forward. You need to keep that in mind as you get older. For the last question, how safe are my investments from stock market fluctuations in an unstable world and market? Boy, if anybody ever tells you they have an investment for you that is 100% safe and it's going to give you a high return, walk away. Go to another investment advisor, because there's nothing that's 100% safe. I mean, we saw this through history. We've had banks collapse, and we have the FDIC, and the government will step in, but there's still nothing that's 100% safe. So I wanted to put that out there. It's not on the slide, but I just wanted to make sure everybody realizes that there is a risk, because the markets and the investments will vary from day to day, and so there's volatility involved. And really, safety, really a personal definition. It's really, what is your percentage of loss or downside that you feel comfortable with before you'd want to sell the investment? And what I tell clients here is this is a long-term concept here. This isn't something you're going to get rich quick. You got to take this over time. And the reason I say that, history has shown that when the market goes down and we have a market crash or whatever, in 3 to 6 months, the market has recovered and is above where it was before the crash. So, clients will call me, and I've had this a couple times where people say, oh my God, the market's down, I'm losing money. And my response to this is, you haven't lost anything. It's just a paper loss at this point in time. Because of the fact that you haven't sold it, you don't actually have a loss. The same thing when the market's up. You think you're making all this money? Not really. It's on paper. If you cash in, you've made money. But, if you ride through that crash, you're concerned, I've lost this money. And my clients have seen this, that, 90 to 180 days later, they're now up above from where they were before, and they're happy. So, it's a long-term project here and horizon that you got to keep in mind. And I hear clients saying, well, I try to time the market, and, it's really hard to do. Unless you have the time to do that and you have the knowledge, I discourage it. If you are going to do it, try using some dollar cost averaging strategy. But I really try to tell people, unless you're going to really invest in the education and understand it, it's not something for the average person. Safe investments, people say, oh, I'm going to put it in a savings account, a money market, CD, whatever you can see from our slide here. Yeah, you can do that, but you're not going to earn much at all. But it is safe. And again, safe, like I said, there is not 100% certainty. You never know, a bank could fold. And, the FDIC may kick in, but, if your balance is more than what their limits are, you could still lose money. So, okay, well, that's the questions that we had. Hopefully I've been able to describe this and answer your questions. I'm going to open this up and see what questions we have.
Thanks, Brian. I've got the phone lines open, so if you're listening live, just go ahead and chime in. The other way to go ahead and ask your question is to use the Q&A box on the left-hand or on the right-hand side of the webinar. And if you type that in, we can go ahead and ask Brian that. I have one question already. What is the correct allocation of funds relating to my age and prospective retirement date? Also, are there any economic red flags that would dictate changes in a portfolio?
Well, that's a good question. It's one that it's really hard to say because, one, we don't know what your risk tolerance is, and that's going to drive a lot of that in figuring out what those ratios are. I would suggest, if you want to schedule an appointment and come in and, we can walk through a lot of that and figure that out. That would be my suggestion. It's not one of those simple things I can just, spout off a number for you, or even red flags. I mean, it's hard to say how people are going to react to what's happening in different parts of the world and what we're doing with tariffs and what other countries are doing, and it varies so much day to day. Is there one red flag? Sometimes people think something's a red flag and it turns out it's not. And sometimes, there's things that could be considered a red flag or that aren't a red flag, and it ends up being a bigger influence than was expected. It's sort of like a crystal ball, and if we knew that answer, everybody'd be rich.
Thanks, Brian. And I've got one other question. It says, at what age, if any, should I be more conservative in my investing choices?
Again, that's going to depend on a couple things. One, how long do you think you're going to still be working and not have to draw on that money? And what are your plans for when you want to retire? What type of lifestyle do you have? And what's your current balance in your investments to make that determination? It's one of those things that, I sit down with a client and we'll start planning out with, okay, well, I'd like to retire in 5 years. Okay, well, let's see where your portfolio is. Where's your balances? What do you need to live on? Determines all that as to how aggressive or conservative you can afford to be.
Great. I think that's it, Brian, in terms of questions tonight.
Okay. Well, I thank everybody for joining and participating in the questionnaires, and encourage you, if you have other questions, give us a call or email us, and we can sit down and go through things.
And Brian, for everybody listening on the replay and live, what's the best phone number or email address to get a hold of you on?
The email address is brians@berkstaxonline.com. Phone numbers from the Reading area is 610-670-1633. From Lancaster, 717-299-7176. Regardless, if you call one of those numbers and it doesn't answer, we get the voicemails. If we happen not to be in the one office, it'll forward to the next. So whichever one you'd rather call, it doesn't really matter. Okay,
sounds great. Again, we want to thank Brian for you taking the time out to go through this information. Very helpful. And for everybody listening live tonight or on the replay, if you do have a question that wasn't answered on the webinar, or maybe you have some type of personal situation and it's best handled offline, with Brian on one-on-one, just give him a call there at the phone numbers on the screen or on the email on the screen also. So again, thanks everybody for attending, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you.